Welcome to Now Serving, a Side of Therapy, your intro guide into the therapeutic world. Together, we'll explore various aspects around how to show up for ourselves and others by tending to our own mental and emotional well-being. I'm your host, Dalton Huckabee, a licensed marriage and family therapist, and I'm grateful you've joined me. Welcome to this week's episode of Now Serving, a Side of Therapy, a client's introductory guide into the therapeutic world. This week, we are joined by Sharon Egan, who has over 30 years of experience in the caring profession, and she has dedicated her career to supporting vulnerable children, adolescents, and families. Her work has spanned a wide client base, including child protection, foster families, youth, homelessness, and residential care settings. She has extensive experience working with individuals with autism and supporting survivors through rape crisis services. Her practice is grounded in compassion, professionalism, and a deep commitment to creating a safe and supportive space for healing and growth. Welcome to this week's episode of the podcast, Sharon. It's a pleasure to have you.
Thank you very much, Dalton. It's a pleasure to be here.
I was kind of curious. So 30 years is a super long time, right? And
Yeah.
so for some of these listeners, that might be more than they were born, longer than they were born, or
I
they've been
know
alive.
when I say it like that, I feel old.
I was going to say, I don't mean to make us feel old. I'm 52, so I'm in the same boat. But I was just kind of curious over that big span of time throughout your work and supporting and educating teens around the subject of sex, that's what the topic is about today, right? That's what we'll be exploring is teenagers and sex relationships. Consent is super important, right? Peer pressure, legal ramifications around all that. So a big topic, right? That we'll be diving into today. And so I was just really curious if we were to try to boil it down to just kind of like a few essential components that come up for you based on your experience, what would you say those would be?
I think when it comes to teenagers and sex, I think open and honest conversations is essential. I think if young people feel that they're included in the discussions, it's a starting point for them. And I think with parents and professionals, and I'm parents of teenagers myself, if they feel that they're respected and that their opinion is warranted, then they're more likely to engage with us. They're more likely to discuss it with us if there is a problem. And they're more likely to come to us if they're concerned or if they're starting to think about sex. And I think opening the conversation is essential.
So you're saying not only conversation amongst the partners themselves, but also like amongst either a teacher or someone that they trust, a parent or someone like that too.
Yeah, I think firstly, as parents, if we ensure that our children feel that they can come to us when things are good, then they'll come to us when things are not good. And they'll actually come to us and maybe ask us advice. With teachers, it's about really just the education system being open to that teenagers these days, they view themselves nearly as many adults, and they're not children. They don't want to be told that you're not to have sex because that's not going to stop them. So I think teenagers are going to have sex. It's about keeping them safe and keeping the conversation open and honest.
Yeah, and keeping them educated, right? And also knowing that they have the power of choice too.
Yes, absolutely.
Having a conversation, can provide like some kind of safety, right? Around, as you said, as teenagers are engaging in these choices that are their first time, right? Just like any of us, right? Whenever we're faced with a new experience and we have to make a decision, we don't always have the information or the experience that we need in order to kind of guide us through that. So relying on other people for that support can be huge, right?
Absolutely.
And so when we think about consent, right, which I think is a huge part too, like you said, right? It does help contribute to that sense of safety and choice that we were talking about.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. Consent is such a big issue at the moment for all young people. And it's coming up more and more about, and I know we'll go into it in more detail, but it's coming up more and more in relation to the partners they engage with, whenever they feel right to have sex, whenever they feel ready to have sex. It's in relation to pornography. And it's it's such a massive factor at the moment, and that young people don't feel that they have the right to consent, or feel that they should be doing something, or everybody else is doing it, so why aren't I doing it?
Yeah, so much pressure coming from all sorts of angles, right? Like you said, we'll certainly be diving into that. And so before we do, whenever we're talking about anything, we always like to define what are we talking about, right? What's the thing that we're talking about? And so how would you say, like in your work, like what would you say, how would you define sex?
Well, sex is any intimate relationship between young people, or any people. For it's not so it's not just one of the things that's coming up is young people think it's the actual physical aspect of sex, but it's any aspect of the sexual relationship, whenever it is touching, whenever it is engaging in oral sex, whenever it's the full act of physical sex. So it's any aspect of it, and it's about making sure that young people feel ready for that, and they feel informed about what does that entail. Because young people might feel it's the actual physical act, and if it's only that, it's okay, but they might feel that they're not able to say to consent to other aspects of it. Like I said, oral sex or any other aspects of it, or touching or feeling.
Yeah, that brings up a good idea. Or what I'm thinking then is like, okay, well, if they decide to maybe, engage in non-penetrative sex, right? And
Mm,
then maybe as they're engaging, then they're faced with, well, is this going to go further beyond what they're ready for? Like that's where that preparation and kind of having our own sense of what are my own boundaries around what I'm willing to do and not willing to do. That could maybe be part of a discussion as well, like before they engage, like what are my current limits?
yeah, and I think that is so important because, as I said, young people think, okay, I should agree to non-penetrative sex. I should agree to oral sex. I should agree to this, or I should agree to that because everybody else is doing it. And not realizing until they're actually in the situation that really this is a part of their sexual relationship, and not having, I suppose, the power or the information or the confidence to be able to say, I don't actually want to go this further. I didn't think it was going to lead to this. So again, I think when we think about sex, definitely as parents and professionals, we think it's about penetrative. But if we educate young people about what the steps up to it entail, how to say yes or how to say no, or what actually happens when they engage in non-penetrative sex, what's that for doing for their body, what's that doing for their emotional stability. And I think if we have those conversations and open and honest about them and give them the facts, because young people respond to being treated as young adults. And I think psychoeducation is so important that they're informed about what everything entails.
Yeah, absolutely. Right. And so if we're going to engage in these adult acts, right, we need maybe kind of encourage taking an adult approach to it.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely.
Before we get into things, as far as like culture and internal and external stressors and the pressure to have sex and all that stuff, we we want to be sure to have an understanding of what are some of the legal requirements
Mm,
around mandated reporting as therapists, right? As a mandated reporter, um, what are some of the parameters around that? So, say, for example, in California, there's the 2116 rule. So, if someone is 21 or older having a sex with someone who is 16 or younger, right, then that's considered statutory rape.
mhm,
And so, even, in some cases, there might be like some clinical judgment, right? So, if someone is 14, if both partners are 14, for example, right, then can be some considerations. And it even starts to get into the types of sex. Like we said, sex is pretty
mhm,
broad. It's not just penetrative. And so some of the mandated reporting laws, right, or they're state specific. In the United States, they can be state specific. So it's best
mhm,
to check with your local state laws
yeah,
around this, right? But so say, for example, even in California, again, if the if the client is 12 years old, for example, having sex with someone who's 14 years old, that's mandated reporting, right?
Mhm.
And so we want to be sure that we're armed with this knowledge whenever we are working with teenagers around sex. And the idea here, right, is the intention is to protect the overall wellness and welfare of the client.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. And I suppose in Ireland, what we have is, so the legal age of sexual consent in Ireland is 17, and anyone under the age of 17 is considered not to be able to legally consent to sex. Um, there are some exceptions to that, which is known as it's commonly known as the Romeo and Juliet effect. So, for example, if a 15 to 16-year-old were engaging in sex, and it was considered, there's a number of factors. So, for example, if it was considered consensual, if it was considered that there was no more than 2 years of an age gap, that it wasn't coercive, there was no authority situation, so it wasn't someone who was in authority situation, there was no coercive, there was no manipulation. Those factors could be considered as consensual. And in that case, what happens is we have a DLP, which is a designated liaison person. So every organization that works with children has a designated liaison person. So, for example, if a teacher came across and they heard that a 15 and 16-year-old or 15, 16-year-old told them that they were engaging in sex, and they told the teacher would take basic facts, they would discuss it with the DLP, and the DLP then would do the assessment, as I said, whenever it was consensual, coercive control, etc. And then based on that, they might decide that they don't need to report it. So it's not necessarily mandated reported in that situation. If it is someone who's 17 and 15, then that is considered mandated reporting. And if it is, even if it is a 16-year-old and an 18-year-old, even though there is only a 2-year age gap, because the 18-year-old is legally an adult, then it is mandate reported, and it is reported to the Gardaí, which is the Irish police. But for example, if it was two 14-year-olds, because the age is 15 and 16, that's the Romeo and Juliet effect. But if it was two 14-year-olds, then that is an automatic mandated reporting. And we have our body here is TUSLA, which is with the child protection responsibility. So in Ireland, I know you're saying that in America there's different states and different laws. In Ireland, it's one law, and that law is the whole of the Republic of Ireland. But even then, that is very confusing for professionals, especially therapists who feel we're in a therapeutic relationship, the young person is discussing it with me, I need to be a safe place. But I think it is so important for therapists to be aware of what the law is, because at the end of the day, we all work within the law. And
Yes, and to communicate that to the client
yeah,
and up
yeah,
front, right? When we're talking about consent, right?
yeah,
If the patient is consenting for their care and they're the one consenting to show up every week, right? Then in that value or principle of consent, right? It's also important for us to kind of advise and educate the clients on these things, and
yeah.
continuing to remind them throughout the course of the work together as well.
Absolutely. Yeah, without a shadow of a doubt. It's something that I always do because I work with adolescents in the therapy room. Apart from going through the whole, if there's risk to yourself, there's risk that you would do with any adults, or if there was any suicide ideation. The one thing I always stress, because young people coming in, they think from their perspective it's a safe space. So it's okay to say, I'm 14 and I've had sex. I think we need to be clear and honest to be able to say, I want to let you know from the very start, this is the law around it. I am a mandated person, so I need you to know this so that we're working from a safe space. And it's something I would remind them throughout the sessions. But I would also say in the session that should I feel that you do inform me of this, and I feel I have to report it, I will discuss it with you beforehand, and we will discuss how we're going to discuss it and how we're going to report it. But I think very much young people respect honesty, and if they know from the start this is the guidelines, these are the boundaries, then it's much easier for them to work within it and to feel that they're in a safe space and make an informed decision.
An informed decision.
Mm,
Absolutely. Yep. That's what this is all about, right?
yeah,
Yeah.
yes.
Yeah. It's a
Key,
huge part.
absolutely key, Dalton. Yes.
Yes. Yes. And especially when, when teenagers can be in the face of peer pressure, right?
Mm,
Around sex, right? Like there can be so many like internal and external stressors that come up, around peer pressure. Um, And I was just curious, like, what's some of your experience around peer pressure and teens with sex and how it lends itself to consent and boundaries and things like this.
Oh, I think peer pressure is such a massive factor. It influences every aspect of their life. Whenever they go into a shop, what clothes they buy, and they're the basic things. So the pressure around sex has definitely multiplied. And in my experience of working with young people over 30 years, it seems to have intensified severely. So, for example, when if I think about in the working with young people even 15 years ago, it was more the peer pressure was not to be engaging in sex or not to be having different partners. Whereas now young people are now saying there is serious pressure to engage in sex at an early age. There's serious pressure to engage in sexual relationships with different partners and to try different things, and that if you're not engaging in these things, you're more or less what we would say in Ireland is frigid. So that there's something wrong with you if you're not, and that pressure comes not only it's at times it's very obvious in the sense that it's very, if you don't have sex with me, I'm going to say this about you, but it's also what young people are saying. It's the kind of underlying comments about, you'll be considered cruel, this everybody's doing it, and even friends, like, so I would young people in the therapy room would say that even their friends are saying, well, why aren't you having sex, and everybody's having sex, and it's a fun thing to do. So but they're getting message, I think, all over the place. It's not just around their friends, it's everywhere. It's in the media, it's on Instagram. Everything is about sex and sexualizing young people, and even a basic thing like the makeup industry, that put on makeup with 12 and 13-year olds. They're really targeting young people to be adults before they're even ready to have adult conversations. So I think peer pressure is such a massive thing for young people, and for me it's about building up resilience to be able to respond to their peers or respond to the pressure without feeling that they're doing something that they don't want to do. Just
And
to
that can be huge because especially for teenagers, like they're always like they're still exploring and trying to discover themselves. And as you were talking, I couldn't help but think that how gender has is influenced by this aspect of peer pressure too, right? Like you said, someone who might be considered frigid, in current society rules, right? Maybe like before, maybe they were, like you said, maybe they were considered more promiscuous, and that was deemed in a kind of a negative way, right? Whereas in now, it might be seen as a little bit more like, hey, like you said, everybody's doing it, right? And
yeah.
so, and I could see how. I mean, I'm curious. Like, do you feel like females are more peer pressured than males in your
I,
experience, or
I
what would you
think
say?
I would have said before, I would have said that females were under a lot more pressure um, to perform. But I actually think, and I work with both males and females, and with the young people that I'm working with, even with the males, they're coming up and saying their friends, if they're in a relationship, their friends are saying to them, well, why aren't you having sex? Why aren't you trying this? Why aren't you trying that? And that if they're coming back and saying, well, I'm going to wait a while or I want to respect her, they're nearly ridiculed. And that's something that's coming across widespread with young people and with young males, that they're nearly feeling pressurized to be this male stallion, and that they are up for it, and why wouldn't they be up for it, and that if they don't want to be having sex at 14 or 15, what's wrong with you? So it's funny how the tide is turning, that it was just girls who have been put under pressure, but now it's actually boys have been put under pressure. And I think the age has come down. So for example, with the young people I would have worked with, it would have been 16 or 17. Now it's 15 and 14-year-olds. I've even had 13-year-olds who've said that they've been put under pressure. And it's coming in twofold. It's coming in as, God, I better do it because I look like I'm stupid, or I look like I'm a child, or it is, I should want this. I should ask my girlfriend to have sex, or if my boyfriend asks me to have sex, I should agree to it. So there is a lot of pressure from their peers, but as I said, from external, from social media, from the like, even if I look at movies that I'm watching with my teenagers, and it is age 15 and they're having sex, and I'm like, oh my goodness, it's age 15. Do you know what I mean? So social media is really, and the industry is really pushing, I think, young people to become adults before they're ready.
We hope you enjoyed this episode about teens and sex. Be sure to tune in next week, where we continue this discussion and explore the influence of social media and culture around teens and sex, how teens can deal with pressure, parental support that can be provided, and overall impact that having sex can have on teens' overall mental health and well-being. Thanks for tuning in this week. If this conversation resonated with you, follow Now Serving, a site of therapy, on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you listen. Be sure to click subscribe and leave a comment, and share with others who may also enjoy. Check out our website at izotherapy.com, where you can contact us to be placed with a therapist who's the best fit for you.